President Donald Trump is planning to speak at 11 a.m. Eastern, less than an hour or so from now, down at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, after confirming that the United States military struck Venezuela early this morning, overnight. And the country's president, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife, Celia Flores, have been captured, he says. Sources tell CNN the couple were dragged from their beds in the middle of the night during this raid, I should say. President Trump confirmed more detail just minutes ago during an interview with Fox News.
He was in a house that was more like a fortress than a house. It had steel doors. It had what they call a safety space, where it's, solid steel all around. He didn't get that space closed. He was trying to get into it, but he got bum rushed so fast that he didn't get into that. We were prepared. We had, massive blowtorches and everything else that you need to get through that steel, but we didn't need it. He didn't make it to that area of the house.
During that interview, the president also said he watched the operation in real time from Mar-a-Lago, his estate down in Florida, and he confirmed a U.S. military helicopter was damaged during the operation. Some Americans, he said, were injured. He said that Maduro and his wife are on board the USS Iwo Jima right now, and they're all heading towards New York. The U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi says Maduro and his wife have been indicted, while Bondi confirmed that Maduro was indicted on narco-terrorism conspiracy charges. It's unclear what the First Lady, Celia Flores, is charged with, if anything. Those strikes were not a complete surprise, as President Trump has been warning of land strikes in Venezuela for weeks. However, a source now tells CNN the White House began notifying congressional leadership about these strikes. He did so after the strikes occurred. Vice President J.D. Vance is already weighing in with a message, and I'm quoting him now. Everyone's saying this was illegal. He says Maduro can't avoid justice for drug trafficking here just because he lives in Caracas. CNN's White House reporter Elena Treen is joining me now. She's here with me in the Situation Room. You just learned some new information about when planning for this operation actually got underway.
Yeah, so according to some of my sources, as well as those of Kylie Atwoods and Kevin Liptax, we were told that the preparations for this operation actually began back in mid-December. And I'd note that we knew that the president had been looking at potential plans to strike land inside Venezuela, as well as to try and oust Maduro. But up until that point, they had left, Wolf, this idea of potential diplomacy open, of trying to get Maduro to step down voluntarily. We know that Trump and Maduro had spoken on the phone earlier, just a couple weeks ago. But when that changed, and when they believed that he was unlikely to do that, these plans began really to take effect. Now, what we're looking at is really what's going to happen next. And according to some of the sources I spoke with, they said that some of the draft plans and some of these preparations that they were working on back in mid-December looked at setting up a transition government inside Venezuela with some Venezuelan leaders to help, fill the power vacuum should Maduro be ousted from power, and then potentially see if they can get elections, see what happens to have elections moving forward. One thing that Trump said that kind of backs some of this up during that interview with Fox, he said that we're making that decision now regarding next steps. And he said, quote, we can't take a chance of letting somebody else run it and just take over what he left off. So it's clear that what they don't want to see is not only Maduro, but one of Maduro's, officials, one of, the vice president, for example, having one of those people take over and continue kind of the Maduro government form of leadership inside. And so that's going to be a huge question for what comes next, because ever since they began really closely looking at Venezuela and how they wanted to operate with these strikes, of course, but now with this idea of what would happen if Maduro was ousted, who would fill that power vacuum. They'd been working on these day after plans for a while, but what was clear is they want a different type of leadership structure there. And the White House has said now publicly for weeks that they believed Maduro was an illegitimate leader, that he and his government did not have the right to be leading the country. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how they move forward with this.
And we know that the Attorney General reminded all of us that Maduro was actually charged in the Southern District of New York with narco-terrorism conspiracy charges, but his wife was not charged with anything, right?
Yeah, it's still very much unclear what his wife was charged with. I think it was a surprise this morning to see that both of them were captured and both of them are now on this boat, the USS Iwo Jima, headed to New York. All of that's gonna, we're gonna have to learn more about that. I'm hoping President Trump gives us some very more clear details at this press conference at 11 at Mar-a-Lago. But there's still a lot that I think everyone is trying to figure out, including lawmakers who it does seem that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, we saw many of them posting this morning, people like Senator Mike Lee, for example, who initially, a lot of these, even Republicans were saying that they were kind of outraged that, what is the reasoning for essentially a declaration of war with these strikes in Venezuela. What I've been hearing in my conversations, we've heard this from some of the lawmakers who post as well, is that they're saying that the justification for this is under the Article 2 of the Constitution. I'm not sure that's going to make a lot of lawmakers happy, particularly those who were kind of promised by many top officials like the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, and the president himself, that they would be briefed by the Trump administration before any such land strikes occurred. So there's going to be a lot of pushback and criticism on that front too, Wolf.
And there's been briefings with members of Congress, but only after the operation. They're supposed to be briefed in advance. Elena, thank you.
Thank you, Wolf.
Very, very much, Elena Trina, our White House reporter. The strikes began overnight, in the middle of the night, early this morning, just across Venezuela. Listen to this. All right, take a look at this. These are live pictures right now. Not these, but we're going to be showing you some live pictures from the capital city of Caracas. Since the strikes ended, it's been, we're told, fairly quiet as people assess the damage. However, we're learning of possible unrest in at least parts of Caracas. Video geolocated by CNN appears to show armed gangs patrolling traffic, with one gunman firing in a car as it reversed away from a traffic stop. And one source there tells CNN that the pro-government gangs are on patrol. CNN's chief international security correspondent, Nick Payton-Walsh, is joining us right now. So what are you learning, Nick? What is happening in Venezuela now?
Yeah, I mean, it's still an unclear picture at this stage, Wolf. And as you might have expected, pro-regime gangs will be exercising the influence they can in some of the areas they control. That is perhaps an extension of government control rather than a suggestion that the government is, to some degree, collapsing. I should point out the images you showed earlier on there of multiple explosions at Higuerote do appear, some sources suggest, to have been the result of an air defense system being hit. So each of those explosions are secondary explosions rather than a sign of the intensity of the American assault. That particular operation, relatively short, I should say, in comparable terms, targeted, efficient. You saw those multiple helicopters flying in. It began, it seems, around about 1 o'clock local time, as President Trump said himself, targeting the specific place where they knew Maduro was, swiftly retrieving him and taking him to the assault amphibious ship, the Iwo Jima, now on to a New York court. As you were hearing there from Elena, though, what happens next is utterly key. And Trump was clear in his Fox interview that he does want to see a change in the character of the government inside of Venezuela. But it's important to remind people, the promises made by exiled opposition politicians don't equate to real change on the ground. We saw years ago how a bid for an uprising to oust Maduro faltered in a matter of hours because they didn't have the security forces on side. Trump certainly wants to see some more substantial change and says that's being discussed now, and the future would be bad for anyone who chose to remain loyal to Maduro. But they have certainly overnight achieved an extraordinary event of removing Maduro and his wife from the capital, where they should have been heavily secured and, frankly, impregnable. But regime change, that is still a question that's yet to be answered. Delcy Rodriguez essentially answering in the role of president now, while Venezuela saying they want Maduro back. There may possibly be some kind of power struggle between those who feel a more hard-line approach is wise and those who seek negotiation with the United States. I'm sure anybody contemplating taking Maduro's seat will be cognizant of the fact that they too potentially could find themselves on a US Special Forces helicopter in the dead of night. But it's really the intensity of the planning for the day after that's key here. Clearly, the military were detailed, competent, extraordinarily effective on what they planned. Probably not the guys you want to be in charge of the day after planning. That will be more down to career diplomats, potentially politicians. That has to be effective. You have to hope that the opposition leaders who say they won the recent election do feature in future planning. But the possibility of having a free and fair election with Venezuela